Hello and welcome to our class on drum miking. Today we have a drum kit set up with various mics around it, and we'll talk about the individual placement and combinations of those mics in a while. But we're going to break it down into manageable chunks. There's several different ways you can make a kit depending on the complexity of the material and depending on the style of music as usual. So we'll start off with the most simple method, which is just one microphone somewhere in the room capturing the entire kit. So if we move backwards, you'll see I've got a mic set up here about 5 paces from the kit. You can move the distance between the single mic and the kit to suit how much of the room that you want on your drum sound. Obviously the closer you get, the drier the drum sound. And the other thing that you have to remember is where you place it in proximity to each drum. So if you want more of the kick drum, you might put it down lower so it's capturing more of the direct sound. If you want more of the cymbals, maybe up higher, somewhere above the kit. When you have it at this distance, you'll usually find that the kit sound kind of blends itself naturally by the time the sound waves get to this distance. Okay, so I find that this is quite a roomy sound. It's got quite a lot of reflections and reverb, but one thing you should do is walk around the room listening to where the kit sounds good, and if there's a particular kit sound, a part of the kit that you want to emphasize in terms of the ambience of it. In my case, it's a kick drum. I think the kick sounds fantastic at this point. Then that's where you should place your mic. So use your ears, let your ears guide you as you walk around the room. And remember as well that you can do this in stereo. Now we've covered stereo miking on a drum kit in a separate tutorial. So see that one about the placement and the choice of mics for that particular method. So for this one, I've chosen a ribbon mic. Remember, ribbon mics are bipolar. So you've got sound coming in from the front and sound coming in from the back. And you'll notice that I've angled it down towards the kick. I sometimes find that when you use a room mic on a drum kit, it's nice to catch some of the reflections from the front of the kit off the floor. That can give you a real nice solid sound on the kick drum. Okay, but as I say, experimentation is the key. Walk around and use things like the proximity effect at the walls, which will amplify the bass if that works for you. I've seen people in the past point the room mics away from the kit to get that more absolutely just reflections and no direct sound. There's a million different ways to do it. Experiment, try it out, read about it, research it, and try out things for yourself. So our first recording that we're going to hear is just one single mic on the entire kit from a distance of about maybe 10 to 15 feet. Okay, so the next simplest arrangement of microphones would be 2 microphones in the kit. In this case, we're going to use one single overhead right over the center of the kit and one mic on the kick drum down here. This again will capture the entire kit very well. The only thing that the overhead won't really capture is the projection of the sound from the kick drum. So this is used to augment the kick sound, and then everything else from the kit can be captured by, again, I'm using a single ribbon overhead mic. Now, a couple of things to look out for when you're using ribbon mics directly over the kit like this. Because they're figure 8, they're going to capture sound from the back, as we've spoken about before. And you just need to make sure that the reflections from the roof don't actually cause phase cancellations coming back down into the mic. Okay, so again, a bit of experimentation. If you find that that's a problem, swap it out for a cardioid pattern microphone so that it only captures the sound coming from below. Okay. Now there's quite a few phase issues. The more mics you introduce into recording a drum kit, the more phase problems that you can potentially introduce. That's a separate class that we'll talk about, and it's more of a practical class, so we'll do that one-to-one. Okay, so one mic, center of the drum kit, one mic on the kick drum. Let's talk about the kick drum placement and choice of microphone. I've chosen Audix D6 for this particular job. There are numerous mics which are dedicated to recording kick drum or particularly good at it. You've got an Audix D6, AKG D112, EV RE20, Shure SM7 even, M88 by Sennheiser. There's 4 or 5 industry standards. They all have one thing in common, and that is that they have a frequency response which responds naturally enough well to low frequencies. Okay, if you look at the frequency response of this particular mic, it has accentuations in the sort of the boom of the kick and also around where the slap of the beater occurs. So it gives you a pretty good kick sound straight off the bat. Okay. Now in terms of placement, it's just about 1 inch inside the sound hole. Usually I would angle it up towards where the beater strikes very slightly. Again, if this doesn't work, slide it out a bit, push it further in if you want more of the beater sound, pull it further out if you want more of the air moving. Again, a bit of experimentation until you get the sound that you're after. And of course that will depend on the drum, it'll depend on the drummer, it'll depend on how much damping there is in the drum. You can see there's quite a bit of sort of blankets and sheets in here already to absorb and soak up some of the sort of resonance of the drum. Okay, it depends what kind of sound you're after though. So let's have a listen to single kick and one single overhead. Okay, now we're going to look at using 4 microphones on the kit, and this time instead of a single overhead we're going to use a stereo or pseudo-stereo arrangement of mics, similar to what we call the Glyn Johns technique developed in the 1960s. And the idea here is that our stereo overheads capture the bulk of the sound from the kit. This one is going to capture the drums and cymbals on this side, this one the drums and cymbals on this side, and then we're going to augment that with a kick drum like we did before. The position hasn't changed. And also this time we're going to add in one mic on top of the snare drum to augment the sound. So again, when you're setting up the mics for this, you should think of your overheads as the bulk of your sound, your main sound, and then you're going to slide the faders of the 2 close mics up to add body and add depth to the drum sound. Now, as I said before, the more mics you add, the more problems with phase you might encounter. So whenever you start bringing your close mics in, just check the polarity of each one and see where it sounds best, if it sounds best in positive polarity or negative polarity along with the overheads. and you'll find that that can make a huge difference to your sound in terms of the solidity of your drums. And you don't want your drums to sound weak and sort of papery. You want them to be nice and solid. You can always take those frequencies away later if it's too loud or too boomy. Okay, so with our two overheads, last time we used a ribbon mic in the center. This time we're going to use two condenser mics, and they're both set to cardioid. Okay, so they're only capturing what's below. And whenever you start to use this type of arrangement and you've got cardioids and you've got close mics, your drum sound tends to come in a bit. Okay, it starts to get a bit drier and a bit more focused on the kit compared to what we heard earlier, where we had one single mic in the room and it was capturing all the ambience as well. So let's have a listen to two overheads, one snare mic and one kick drum mic. Okay, so the last configuration we're going to look at is your typical multi-mic drum kit. So this is everything that you can possibly think of on the kit. Okay, so this time we're going to have stereo overheads, we're going to have close mics on each drum, and we're going to have a room mic as well. Now, you could go further and you could mic each cymbal, especially the hi-hats. Sometimes people like to mic top and bottom of each floor tom. We're not going to actually go that far. This would be a sort of a typical recording session with maybe 8 tracks for your drums. Okay, so our starting point is the same as before. It's our stereo overheads. Nothing's changed there. Still in cardioid, still placed in a Glyn Johns type arrangement. We've still got a single mic on the bass drum. Again, you might consider using a mic on the beater side of the bass drum as well. Sometimes people find that that adds to the sort of immediacy of the kick sound. Previously we had one mic on the top of the snare. Now this time we've added another mic at the bottom of the snare because it's very difficult for any of these mics above the kit to pick up the sound of the snare wire, which obviously is in here. So we've got one mic dedicated to that. Now this presents a particular issue. Because this mic is facing upwards and the other one is facing downwards, they're capturing the sound that comes from the snare drum in opposite polarity. So this mic should always be in opposite polarity to this one on the desk whenever you're adding it in. Okay? Whether this one is positive or negative will depend on how it sounds along with the overheads, but this one should always be opposite to what the top mic is doing. Okay? So moving on, then we've got one microphone on the rack tom. And this microphone is, again, just like the kick drum mic, this is dedicated for rack mounting onto drums. And it has a few special design features which make it suitable for that. The first one is that it is a hypercardioid pattern, polar pattern. This means that it picks up very focused sound on the front and won't pick up sound from the rest of the drums, which is desirable in this case. And also it's quite small and easy to place. Okay, so you can get it in. You can see how busy the drum kit gets, and you can see you've got to be careful whenever you're placing your mics that none of the hardware is touching, obviously, because that'll create vibrations. So this is an ideal solution for that. It also has because it's designed to work in close proximity with the drum, which is quite resonant in the low mid frequencies, it has a filter built into it as well. It doesn't pick up very well below about 160 hertz, which is again is good. Okay, and then we've got the same type of mic again on the floor tom, and this is adjustable. You can move it closer or further away, but again, just sort of angle towards the center of the drum, a couple of inches away is the sort of ideal position. And you just need to be careful that you place it, you don't want, especially on a small tom like this, you don't want it too close to the center so that the drummer is going to strike it. That's especially true if you're not using this type of mic. If you're going to use a condenser mic, which may be very expensive, just make sure that it's out of harm's way as much as possible. Okay. So the last thing in this combination is we're going to reintroduce our room mic, which again is still about 10-15 feet away. And you could also add the center mic here as well. Again, check the phase between this, and this. Make sure this is the same distance from the snare drum as these are. And you can quite safely add that as a mono center for your drum kit. What you may find is that the overheads give it a big wide stereo image, which is great, but then you might be missing something in the center, a bit of solidity, and this can add that. So, just to recap, kick drum, 2 snare mics, a mic on each tom, stereo overhead arrangement, mono overhead, and 1 single room mic to capture ambience. And let's have a listen to that. Okay, so that concludes our session on drum miking. You can see that we went from a very simple setup to quite a complicated setup, and that's by no means the only way to do it. I'm only giving you starting points. You can experiment with different mic positions, different microphones, different drum kits, different ways of damping the drums. There's a million ways to do it. And also, I would encourage you to check out the records that you love, find out who the engineers and producers were, find out what techniques they use themselves, find out what processing they put in the drums. Sometimes it's difficult to equate what you're doing with the sound of a finished record because of the amount of processing that goes on. But the main thing I want you to take from it is just your awareness of how to capture a good solid drum sound with no phase problems, okay? And that comes from just listening. So whenever you download the multi-track, you'll have all these individual mics as single files, and I would encourage you to fade in, start with your overhead, start with the bulk of your sound like we discussed, overhead mono or stereo, and fade in the close mics and listen out for how the sound should augment what's already there, and you shouldn't lose any frequencies, you shouldn't lose any power, you shouldn't lose any body. It's better to start off with a good, thick, powerful sound because you can carve out what you don't want later. It's very difficult to put frequencies back in that aren't there in the first place. Okay, so I hope this has been some help to you, and enjoy being creative with your drum mics.